Welcome to a gentle journey back in time. In this episode, we will explore the quiet, hidden world of a Victorian mansion, what it was really like to be a maid serving in one of those sprawling households. In the mid-19th century Victorian era, beneath the elegance and opulence of wealthy homes, a small army of domestic servants toiled from dawn until midnight. Tonight we'll focus on the life of one such servant, a young housemaid in a grand English country house. So fluff up your pillow, settle in, and let's imagine ourselves in a large Victorian mansion. Sometime in the late 1800s, the household is quiet and dark, but not for long. Down below in the servants' quarters, a new day is about to begin for our heroine. Let's call her Mary, a hard-working maid. Take a slow breath and picture the scene. Before dawn in the servants' quarters, it's hours before sunrise, perhaps around 5 a.m. The grand house still slumbers in darkness. In the family's luxurious bedrooms upstairs, the wealthy owners are tucked in their plush feather beds, dreaming away. But far below in the servants' quarters, the day is already starting. In a tiny attic room up under the eaves, Mary's eyes flutter open to the faint gray pre-dawn light seeping through a small window. The air is chilly. She can see her breath as she exhales. Mary is a housemaid, one of the many servants employed in this Victorian mansion. She sleeps in a modest cot with a thin mattress filled with straw. Her room is sparse, just a little wooden dresser, a washstand with a basin and pitcher of cold water, and a single peg on the wall where her extra dress hangs. She shares this attic space with another young maid, her friend Alice. Alice's soft snores can be heard from the other side of the room, still bundled under her blanket for a few more precious minutes. Mary rubs her eyes and sits up, wrapping a threadbare shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. There is no central heating here, only the warmth that rises up, not very effectively, from the kitchen fire 2 floors below. On winter mornings, the frost might even glisten on the inside of the window pane. Mary has long gotten used to the cold, though she simply moves a bit faster to keep herself warm as she dresses. She lights a small oil lamp or candle with a satisfying scratch of a match. The gentle flame casts a faint golden glow on the sloped ceiling. It's just enough light for Mary to get dressed. She wouldn't want to risk a bright light waking anyone, servants or family, at this hour. Quietly she reaches for her work clothes, which she laid out neatly the night before. For her morning chores, Mary wears a plain, faded cotton dress. It's a dull gray-blue color, chosen because it doesn't show dirt easily. Over the dress she ties a long, sturdy apron. This apron is not the pretty frilled kind you might imagine from TV costumes. It's a heavy brown linen apron, meant to protect her dress from soot and dust. She also pulls on thick stockings and laces up her worn leather boots. These boots have seen better days, but they are comfortable and durable, important for someone who will be on her feet, rushing about, for the next 16 hours or so. Finally, Mary pins a small white cap over her hair. All the housemaids wear caps, both to keep their hair out of the way, and to identify them as servants. Mary's cap is simple, made of plain white cotton with a ruffle edging. She tucks all her brown hair underneath it in a bun. If you were to see her now, you'd recognize the classic attire of a Victorian maid. A dark dress, a long apron, and a cap. Humble and practical. Dressed and ready, Mary takes a moment for a quiet yawn, and perhaps a quick prayer or thought to herself. She might think of her family. Many maids like Mary are village girls who came to the city, or a great house to earn wages to send home. Mary in our story is about 18 years old, from a nearby village. Maybe her mother was a servant too in her youth, or her father is a farm laborer. Mary took this position to help support her younger siblings. It's not an easy life, but she's grateful to have a job and a roof over her head. From down the hall comes a soft shuffling sound. Other servants are waking as well. In the dim corridor outside the attic rooms, a couple of the other maids emerge from their tiny chambers, also buttoning up their work dresses and tying aprons. They nod or whisper a quiet good morning to each other. No one wants to speak loudly. The family and any house guests are still asleep, and a good servant moves through the house almost like a ghost, silent and unseen. Mary's friend Alice finally stirs, mumbling sleepily as she sits up. Mary offers her a small smile, and perhaps a teasing whisper. Up you get, lazy bones. Nearly 5:30. Alice sighs and starts to dress as Mary picks up her oil lamp and slips out of the room to begin her duties. It's time to light the fires and get the house ready for the day. Mary's stomach rumbles a bit. She hasn't eaten since yesterday's meager supper. But breakfast for the servants won't be until later, after the urgent morning work is done. So for now, she ignores the hunger and focuses on her tasks. She carefully descends the narrow back staircase that connects the servants' attic to the rest of the house. The stairs are plain wood, well worn by years of servants' feet. Mary's lamp casts dancing shadows on the walls as she goes down. She moves as lightly as she can. Even at this hour, a truly professional maid tries not to make the stairs creak. As she passes the next floor, where the family bedrooms are, Mary is extra cautious. She hears nothing but silence behind the grand doors. The master and mistress are fast asleep in their four-poster bed, and the children in the nursery are hopefully still dreaming. Good. Mary wouldn't want to accidentally wake anyone with a stray sound. Down she goes, into the main floor of the house, the domain of elegant parlors, the dining room, the grand entry hall. All of it is dark and still, like a stage waiting for actors to arrive. But Mary is not here to admire the decor. She has work to do. Clutching her lamp, she heads straight to the dining room first. There's a fireplace there that must be cleaned and relayed. Kneeling on the hearth, Mary sets down her lamp and starts one of the most important morning tasks for a Victorian maid: cleaning out the fireplace and lighting the fire. In an era before central heating, keeping the home's many fireplaces going was essential for warmth and comfort. Nearly every significant room has its own fireplace, which means dozens of fires must be maintained throughout the house each day. The first chore at dawn is to tend to those that went out overnight. Mary takes up a metal poker and begins to rake out the ashes from last night's fire. The ashes are cold now, a pile of gray and black soot. She scoops them into a bucket, trying not to cough as a puff of soot rises, though inevitably, some fine ash dusts her apron, and maybe even her face. She'll have a sooty smudge on her nose before long. Once the grate is cleared, she crumples old newspaper, yesterday's London Times, perhaps, which the butler had carefully ironed smooth after the master read it, and lays it in the hearth. Yes, ironing newspapers was a real task for butlers in Victorian high society. It prevented ink from smudging the master's hands, and made the papers lie flat. A little tidbit of upstairs-downstairs life. Over the crumpled paper, Mary arranges small dry kindling sticks and coals in a neat stack. With a practiced motion, she strikes a long match and lights the paper. It catches quickly, the flames licking up and igniting the kindling. Soon the coal will start to burn, and a nice little fire will be crackling in the grate. Mary adds a few more lumps of coal from the coal scuttle, a metal bucket, to ensure the fire will last. She'll come back later to check it. For now, a faint warmth begins to spread in the dining room, and a tiny flicker of orange light dances on the walls. One room down, many more to go. Mary retrieves her bucket of ashes and lamp. She carries them carefully out into the hall. The house is built with a back corridor, so servants can move about somewhat unseen. Mary slips through a side door to deposit the ashes outside. Under the pale light of dawn, she dumps the ash bucket in a designated spot behind the house. The cold morning air bites at her cheeks, but she takes in a lungful of it gratefully. At least outside she can stretch for a second and breathe freely. She glances at the eastern horizon and sees the first blush of sunrise. No time to dawdle though. She hurries back inside to continue her rounds. Returning indoors, Mary now moves room to room on the ground floor, repeating the process: rake ashes, lay fire, strike match, feed coals. The drawing room, the library, the master's study, each must have a welcoming fire by the time the family comes down. It's strenuous work, the coal scuttle is heavy, and bending to clean the hearth strains her back. Mary's hands are already a bit chapped and sooty, but she's used to it. She works methodically and quickly. In the drawing room, she also pauses to draw back the heavy curtains and open the shutters. As she pushes open the ornately carved wooden interior shutters, morning light floods into the room. Dust motes dance in the beam of sunlight. Mary wrinkles her nose at them. Dust is the eternal enemy of a housemaid. She knows once the fires are done, her next duty will be to dust and sweep all these rooms before the family ever steps foot in them. For now she leaves the dust for later, and focuses on getting everything warmed up and aired out. Elsewhere in the house, a similar ritual is happening in parallel. Mary is just one member of the domestic staff. In the kitchens downstairs, the kitchen maid and scullery maid have their own pre-dawn duties. The kitchen maid has been up since around 5 a.m. too, helping the cook light the big kitchen stove and start preparing breakfast for everyone, family and servants alike. The scullery maid, likely the youngest servant, maybe a girl of 14 or 15, has begun fetching water and scrubbing yesterday's pots and pans. The poor girl probably had the last shift last night, washing dishes from dinner, and now she's up early to finish what remains and start again. Meanwhile, the butler and footman, male servants, are stirring as well. The butler, who oversees all the household's male staff and the wine cellar and plate, might not be up quite as early as Mary, but he'll be awake soon to ensure the family's breakfast table is properly set, and the silver coffee pot is polished to a shine. One of the footmen is likely already quietly laying out the dining table settings under the butler's direction, making sure every knife and crystal glass is perfectly in place for breakfast. And upstairs, in a small room near the family's bedrooms, the lady's maid is rising too. The lady's maid is a personal servant to the mistress of the house. Her schedule is tied to her mistress's needs. Soon she'll be helping the lady dress for the morning. But she also got up early to perhaps brush and lay out the mistress's morning gown, and set up the dressing table with combs and lotions. A lady's maid has a somewhat more refined job than a housemaid, like Mary. She handles fine clothes, jewelry, and hairdressing, rather than scrubbing floors. Still, she is a servant, and her time is at her employer's disposal at virtually all hours. Sometimes a lady's maid might be up past midnight if her mistress attended a late ball, then also up at dawn if needed. Truly always on call. All these servants, housemaids like Mary, kitchen maids, scullery maids, footmen, butler, lady's maid, and possibly more, make up the invisible machinery that keeps the mansion running. At the crack of dawn, below stairs is already abuzz, even though above stairs everything appears tranquil. Let's take a moment to understand the hierarchy and types of servants in a grand Victorian household. This context will help our story of Mary make even more sense. A hierarchy below stairs Victorian mansions often required a whole team of servants, each with specific roles. In fact, in truly grand estates of the 19th century, the number of servants could be astonishing. Large country houses sometimes had dozens of staff members. For example, one duke's estate might employ 30, 40, or even 50 indoor servants, not to mention the outdoor gardeners and stable hands. In one famous case, the Duke of Westminster's estate at Eden Hall had around 300 servants, including more than 40 gardeners, practically a village of staff on one property. But our story is focused on a more typical, if still wealthy Victorian household, maybe with a staff of around a dozen to 20 servants. The servant hierarchy was quite strict. At the top of the below stairs chain of command were the butler and the housekeeper. The butler was usually the senior male servant, in charge of the dining room, wine cellar, and supervision of footmen and other men servants. The housekeeper was the senior female servant, overseeing all the maids and the general management of household provisions. The housekeeper was often addressed as Mrs. last name, as a mark of respect, even if she was unmarried. She kept the keys to storage cupboards and linen closets, managed budgets for cleaning supplies and groceries, and made sure all the female staff did their jobs properly. If something wasn't clean enough, the housekeeper would be the one to hear about it from the mistress and then scold the responsible maid. Below them, you had specialized roles. Lady's maid, as mentioned, she attended the lady of the house, or sometimes grown-up daughters. Duties: helping the mistress dress, styling her hair, caring for her wardrobe, brushing dresses, sewing repairs, cleaning delicate fabrics, and packing for travel. A lady's maid needed skills in dressmaking and hairdressing and had a closer relationship with the mistress. She might even accompany the mistress on trips or to social events, waiting in the dressing room until needed. This position was relatively comfortable and higher status among servants. A lady's maid might receive her mistress's cast-off dresses, altered to fit, and jewelry as gifts. But it also meant being available whenever the mistress required, which could be very early or very late. Valet, the male equivalent of a lady's maid, serving the master of the house. He laid out the gentleman's clothes, shaved him, drew his baths, kept his wardrobe and boots in order. In our household, perhaps the master has a valet named John, who sees to his needs. Valets and ladies' maids were often considered upper servants, a cut above the rest of the maids and footmen. Cook or chef. In a wealthy home, you might have a skilled cook, sometimes even a French chef, as having a French chef was a status symbol. The cook ran the kitchen and decided the menus, usually working with the lady of the house for approval. Under the cook would be a kitchen maid or two, who prepared ingredients, tended the stove, and cooked simpler dishes or staff meals. And at the bottom of the kitchen hierarchy, the scullery maid, who did all the dirty cleaning, pots, pans, ovens, and also often helped with vegetable peeling, water fetching, and keeping the kitchen tidy. The scullery maid was typically the lowest ranked and lowest paid servant in the entire house. Often a young teenage girl, she worked incredibly long hours in wet, steamy conditions, washing endless dishes and utensils. And she slept in a corner of the kitchen or attic. If anyone had a harder day than Mary, it was the scullery maid. Housemaids. There could be several housemaids in a big mansion. They handled the general cleaning of all the rooms. There might be a head housemaid, or sometimes called parlor maid. If the house didn't have many footmen, she might also serve at table. Under her, there would be second housemaid, third housemaid, etc., depending on how many were employed. In a smaller household, you might have just one or two housemaids who did everything. Housemaids did the dusting, sweeping, polishing of furniture, cleaning of fireplaces, making beds, emptying chamber pots, and generally keeping the living areas and bedrooms clean and in order. Mary in our story is a housemaid of the lower rank, not the head housemaid, who would typically be older and more experienced, perhaps in her 30s, and reporting directly to the housekeeper, but a junior one 18 years old and relatively new to service. Parlor maid. Some households, especially later in the Victorian era, or in slightly less formal homes, had parlor maids, instead of footmen, for serving meals and answering the door. They were female servants, who did many of the functions a footman might do, bringing in tea trays, greeting guests, etc., but at a cheaper salary than a male servant. In our grand mansion scenario, we have traditional footmen, so we might not have a parlor maid by title. Mary's duties might sometimes involve parlor work, like delivering tea if needed, but primarily, she cleans. Laundry maid. If the household was large enough, they might have a maid dedicated to doing laundry. because laundry in those days was an enormous chore. Washing and drying clothes and linens, sheets, towels, tablecloths, with 19th century technology, was a multi-day affair. Laundry was often done only one day a week. Commonly Monday was wash day, because it took all day to soak, scrub, boil, rinse, wring, and hang the fabrics. Then another day or two to dry and iron them. If no dedicated laundry maid was hired, the work fell to the housemaids, under the housekeeper's supervision. Many a Victorian maid dreaded Monday wash day above all. For narrative simplicity, let's say in our house, there is one laundry maid, who on Mondays, sweats over the wash tubs from dawn till nightfall, with help from the scullery maid. Mary might count herself lucky that she mostly deals with dust and fires, not washing heaps of dirty linens by hand, at least most days. Nursemaid, or nanny. If there are young children in the family, a nurse nanny would be employed to care for them. The nurse might have a nursemaid under her if multiple children. They largely stayed in the nursery area, feeding, washing, and entertaining the children, and often slept in the nursery to be on call if a child woke at night. While not a maid in title, the nursery staff were still servants. Interestingly, a nanny could be quite authoritative, and sometimes almost considered part of the family, since she basically raised the children. But she was in a strange middle ground, not a genteel family member, but not quite the same as the scullery maid in status either. Hallboy, boot boy. This would be a very young male servant, maybe 12 to 16 years old, who did errand boy tasks and cleaned boots, collected coal, and stayed on call for odd jobs. Think of him as an apprentice footman or general helper. He'd eat with the servants and run around doing whatever minor tasks needed doing. Not every house had one, but many did, to lighten the load on others for small chores. The servants' hierarchy was a reflection of the rigid class system of Victorian society. In miniature, the butler and housekeeper were near the top, just under the family themselves. They even often ate separately from the lower servants. For instance, the butler, housekeeper, cook, and perhaps the valet and lady's maid might dine in the housekeeper's room, or butler's pantry, sometimes called the upper servants' table, or the steward's room, enjoying slightly better food and a bit more formality. The rest of the servants ate in the servants' hall, which was the common dining area for staff, and they had simpler fare. In our mansion, the housekeeper, butler, and cook likely have their own small dining arrangement. The other maids, Mary, Alice, the kitchen maid, etc., and the footman and hallboy, will eat together in the servants' hall when time permits. It's worth noting that not all Victorian households were huge aristocratic mansions. Many were modest middle-class homes that might have just one or two servants, often a single maid-of-all-work. The maid-of-all-work was a general servant who literally did everything, cooking, cleaning, washing, in a smaller household that could only afford one servant. This was an incredibly exhausting position, often held by very young girls as well, and it had none of the support system or specialization of a big house. A maid-of-all-work might start at 5 a.m. and not finish until 11 p.m., just like Mary, but with no teammates to share duties. Such a girl might be running from scouring pots to answering the front door to changing the baby's diaper, all in one day. They were sometimes called general servants, or disparagingly slavies, because their toil was so relentless. In our story, Mary is not a maid-of-all-work, thank goodness, or she'd never have a minute to breathe. But keep in mind that many Victorian maids were in that exact situation, especially in less wealthy homes. By the late 19th century, domestic service was the largest employment of women in Britain. In 1891, about 1 in every 3 women aged 20 was a domestic servant of some kind, over 1 million young women in total. So Mary's story while set in a fancy mansion, represents a very common experience for young women of that era. Now that we understand Mary's place in this hierarchy, she's a lower housemaid under the supervision of the housekeeper. Let's rejoin her in her morning routine. She has lit the fires in the main rooms downstairs. The house is starting to warm up gently. The pale dawn is creeping into the windows, and it's time for Mary to tackle the next set of chores before the family awakens. Morning duties begin. Mary puts away the ash bucket and poker, and takes a moment to wipe her hands on her apron. They're grimy from handling coal. Her apron, once brown, now has streaks of black ash on it. That's why she wears this heavy work apron in the early morning. Beneath it, her dress is hopefully still relatively clean. She knows that later, once the dirtiest work is over, she'll change into a cleaner apron, and perhaps even a better dress to be presentable, if she has to be seen by the family. Many housemaids had a practice of switching attire mid-morning, a coarse apron for fires and scrubbing, and a fresh white apron afterward for serving breakfast, or doing lighter cleaning. Mary will do the same. With the ground floor fires going, and the rooms open to air out, Mary now hurries to the housekeeper's room. There she picks up her supplies for the day from her housemaid's box. A housemaid's box is essentially a wooden caddy, or box that contains all the tools a maid needs. Rags, dusters, brushes, soap, black lead, a polish for grates, candles, and other cleaning supplies. It often had a lock, and the housekeeper would issue each maid her allotted materials, and then lock away the rest, to prevent waste or theft of expensive items like candles. Mary reports to the housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Barrow. Mrs. Barrow quickly inspects Mary's box, to be sure she has everything needed. Fresh cloths, a filled chamber pot deodorizer. Perhaps yes, they did have little powders to sprinkle, and the all-important dusting cloth. Mary curtsies and heads off to begin her next tasks. Now it's about 6:30 a.m. The family usually wakes around 7 or 7:30. Mary must rush to do several things just so in that brief window. First, she checks the fires she lit, to ensure they are burning nicely. She adds a bit more coal where needed, and tidies up any stray coal dust on the hearths. Then one of her key morning duties, she goes through each drawing room and parlor, and gives them a quick cleaning, while no one is using them. She opens windows for a few minutes to let fresh air in, weather permitting. She dusts the furniture lightly, using a soft cloth, or perhaps a feather duster. Victorian houses had a lot of bric-a-brac vases, figurines, ornate tables, with intricate legs, and dust would accumulate everywhere. A good maid learned to be thorough but efficient, dusting even the tops of picture frames, and the undersides of tables, where a curious fingertip might check. Mistresses were known to run a gloved finger along surfaces to test for dust. Woe betide the maid who failed that white glove test. Mary knows exactly which spots Mrs. Barrow will inspect later, and she makes sure to wipe them. She might even have a bit of cotton wool to clean delicate crevices on gilt frames. Next, Mary sweeps the floors of any rugs or carpets. Many Victorian houses had large rugs covering polished wooden floors. Mary rolls up small rugs or druggets, protective carpet coverings, and takes them outside for a quick shake to get rid of dust. If it's a cleaning day for a particular room, she may even use a carpet beater to give them a more thorough beating outside, sending clouds of dust flying, a job that's both tiring and messy. She sweeps the exposed wood floors with a broom. In some rooms with wall-to-wall carpet, she'll use a hand brush and dustpan. Early vacuum cleaners existed by the late 1800s, but were rare and hand-operated. Most cleaning was done manually with brushes. She also wipes down the hearths, where she lit fires, to remove any ash she spilled, and polishes the fire irons. maybe using a bit of that black lead paste to make the cast iron grate shiny and black again after scraping ash. All this is done briskly, yet quietly. Mary moves quickly but keeps noise to a minimum. She is hyper-aware that directly above, the family is still asleep. If she were to start clattering about or talking loudly, it would be a serious breach of servant etiquette. A well-trained Victorian maid almost seems to glide silently through rooms. Mary might hum under her breath very softly, or in her head, but she wouldn't dare sing out loud or engage in any noisy behavior at this hour. By around 7 a.m., Mary's co-worker Alice, the other junior housemaid, has come down to help. Alice took a bit longer to get ready, perhaps, or had to help in the kitchen first. Together they can finish the main floor's initial tidying faster. They might split tasks, Mary dusting while Alice sweeps, for instance. They exchange a few whispers. Did you do the library yet? I'll get the front hall. This quiet teamwork is essential. There's a lot to be done in a short time. One of them, perhaps Mary, also takes on an important duty, emptying the household's chamber pots and washstands. Remember, in the Victorian era, indoor plumbing was not common in older country houses. The family members each likely have in their bedrooms a porcelain chamber pot for nighttime needs, as well as a washstand with a basin and pitcher for washing face and hands in the morning. It's the servant's job to discreetly empty and clean those chamber pots, sometimes politely referred to as slops, every morning. It's not the most pleasant task, as you can imagine. Mary fetches the chamber pots from the downstairs guest rooms, for any guests that stayed over, and from any night nurseries on the ground floor. Some houses had a sick room or nursery downstairs. She carries them carefully to avoid any spillage that would be mortifying and messy, down to the servants' WC, or a slop sink to empty, rinse, and sanitize them. Later she will have to do the same for the upstairs bedrooms, but she can't do that until the family has vacated those rooms. By about 7:30 the lower floor is in decent shape, fires lit, rooms aired and lightly cleaned, supplies prepared. Mary takes a moment to wash her hands. She goes to the scullery or a servant's bathroom area and scrubs the soot and dust off with soap. She might also splash her face to freshen up. Now she removes her dingy work apron and switches to a clean white apron. This apron is shorter and made of white cotton with maybe a bit of ruffle or lace on the edge. It's the one she will wear when she's in sight of the family. She also checks her cap, tucking back any stray hairs, and straightens her dress. Despite all her labor, she must appear neat and composed upstairs. You wouldn't think she had been kneeling in ashes minutes ago, except perhaps a stubborn smudge on her cheekbone she didn't notice. That happens. Mary then takes a special tray called a calling tray or salver and goes to carry out the next duty, waking the family politely. In some households it was customary for a maid or footman to announce that it's time to wake up, almost like a human alarm clock. The term used was to call someone. Mary collects the calling tray from the still room, a small room off the kitchen or pantry area where tea and coffee are prepared. On this tray there might be a cup of tea or coffee or hot chocolate for the masters, or simply it might be empty but used for the formality of knocking and entering. She will knock gently on the bedroom doors of family members, except any single gentleman guests. It was considered improper for a young maid to enter a bachelor gentleman's room, so the valet or footman would do those. For the mistress and master, Mary gives a soft knock and awaits a response. Inside, the master or mistress might groggily say yes, and Mary, not opening the door yet, would call through softly, "Good morning, my lady. It's 7:30. If the lady responds, Mary then enters if bidden with the tray, perhaps with a cup of hot tea or the morning letters. In some houses the lady of the house liked to have tea in bed to start the day, served by her lady's maid or a housemaid. Let's imagine Mary brings in a small steaming cup of tea on a delicate china saucer for the mistress. She sets it on the bedside table quietly, draws the curtains open a bit to let in morning light, and says gently, "It's a fine morning, ma'am. Mrs. Barrow, the housekeeper, asks if you would like your breakfast at the usual time." The mistress, still in her lace nightcap, might murmur assent. Mary doesn't engage in any further chat. She curtsies and slips out unless the mistress asks something. The lady's maid will come in shortly to help the mistress get dressed. Mary's job is just the initial call and maybe that cup of tea. If there are older children or young adult daughters, Mary might similarly knock and enter their rooms to open curtains and perhaps light their fireplace if they have one in the bedroom, or deliver hot water for washing. In Victorian times, it was common for servants to bring hot water up to the bedrooms each morning, because without indoor hot taps, each person needed a pitcher of warm water to wash their face, hands, and do their toilette. Mary and Alice haul heavy jugs of hot water, heated in the kitchen boilers, upstairs to each occupied bedroom. This is quite laborious. Water is heavy. If each large ewer holds several quarts of water, carrying 2 at a time up flights of stairs is a workout indeed. Maids had to be strong for this reason, as it's noted that lugging hot water upstairs was one of the more physically demanding daily tasks. Mary likely has to use a cloth to hold the hot metal handle of the jug. She delivers it to the washstand, pours some into the basin, and leaves the rest in the pitcher, then quietly exits. The family members will wash themselves. There's no full bath, just a sponge bath at the basin. Mary will later have to come collect those now cool water pitchers and the used towels. By about 8 a.m., the household is really coming to life. The master and any sons or gentlemen guests might be stirring. One of the footmen will go up to assist the men if needed, for example, bringing hot shaving water for a gentleman to shave, or helping carry bath water if someone wants a hip bath filled. The lady's maid is busy with the mistress, brushing her hair 100 strokes and cinching her corset and buttoning up her morning dress. The children in the nursery are awake too. Perhaps a nursemaid got them dressed and they'll have breakfast in the nursery. Downstairs, the kitchen is now full of good smells. The cook and kitchen maid have likely prepared a traditional hearty English breakfast for the family. Bacon, eggs, sausages, toast, maybe porridge or kippers, depending on the day. They've also prepared a simpler breakfast for the servants themselves. Typically, servants might have porridge or bread and dripping fat or some tea to start their day. Nothing fancy. However, the servants usually can't sit to eat until after the family's breakfast is served, or at least until the morning flurry is over. There's a saying that servants took their meals at odd hours and always second to the family's schedule. In many houses, the servant's first chance to grab a cup of tea or coffee was during a short mid-morning break, sometimes around 10 a.m. But some houses did give a quick early bite. In our house, let's say the cook has sent up a pot of tea and some bread to the servants' hall around 7:30, and Mary managed to snatch a few sips of hot tea and a nibble of bread in the kitchen before running upstairs with water jugs. She drinks her tea quick and hot, appreciating the warmth as it goes down, then continues on her rounds. No leisurely breakfast for Mary, just a quick refueling. Preparing the house for the day. Now that the family is awake and beginning their day, Mary must shift her focus to keeping out of sight yet still getting her work done. Victorian etiquette strongly emphasized that servants should be invisible unless needed. The ideal was that the rooms magically cleaned themselves and fires sprung to life without any member of the household ever being disturbed or seeing the servants at work. Of course, the reality was that servants like Mary had to scurry around to make that happen, often darting out of a room just as a family member entered. As the family head to the breakfast room, Mary withdraws from those areas. Suppose the family, the master, mistress, perhaps their 2 teenage children and a guest or two, are now sitting down to breakfast at 8:30 in the dining room. The butler and footmen handle the serving of that meal, laying out dishes on the sideboard, pouring coffee, bringing in hot plates. Mary's not directly needed there, so she pivots to other tasks. This is a good time for Mary to attend to the bedrooms upstairs, now that the occupants have left them to eat or begin their day. Mary and Alice go into each family bedroom to make the beds and tidy up. They throw open the curtains if they haven't already, and perhaps open a window to air the room. Yes, even in winter, a quick airing was common to clear out stuffiness. They strip back the bed covers, fluff and beat the pillows which might be feathers and get compacted, and then neatly remake the bed. Fresh linens aren't put on daily, usually that happened once a week unless something soiled them, but they will straighten everything, tighten hospital corners, and make it look pristine. On certain days, like every Saturday, they might change the bedding entirely, gathering the used sheets for the laundry. They also empty any slop jars or washstand basins in these bedrooms. Now, the family have used their water to wash. Mary collects the now dirty water. Often there was a china slop jar under the washstand to receive the used water. Mary carefully takes that, plus the infamous chamber pot from under the bed, if used, and puts them on a tray to carry away. She'll dispose of that water and waste in the appropriate place, a slop sink, or maybe outside. This task was sometimes euphemistically called doing the bedrooms. It's not glamorous, but it is essential for basic hygiene and comfort. Mary replaces the used towels with fresh ones from the linen cupboard. The housekeeper keeps a tight inventory of those. She checks that each washstand has a clean soap, the brushes and combs are put back in place, and everything looks orderly. If a guest has slept over, she might also discreetly pick up any clothing they left on the floor, though usually a valet or lady's maid would handle the personal clothing of guests if they have them. One delicate duty: hot water bottles. In winter, the family members might have had heated pans or earthenware hot water bottles in their beds at night. Come morning, those have cooled. Mary removes them, empties any remaining water, and will later refill them in the evening. Also, if any family member wasn't feeling well and had something like a bedroom commode or special requests, Mary would handle those under direction of the housekeeper. Now the bedrooms are neat, beds made, chamber pots emptied, fresh water provided for later if needed. Mary glances around to double-check everything is just so. Sometimes the mistress or housekeeper might inspect the bedrooms after the maids clean to ensure no corners cut. One tricky thing: in performing these tasks, Mary must be mindful of the family's privacy and possessions. Victorian servants had a mantra: no prying and no gossiping. Mary sees personal items, letters on the writing desk, a diary perhaps, costly jewelry on a vanity. She has been trained to never snoop or touch valuables beyond what is necessary to dust around them. A trustworthy servant was expected to be almost part of the furniture, present but unobserving. Mary takes pride in being honest and careful. She would never dream of sneaking a read of her mistress's correspondence, even if it lies open, and she certainly wouldn't pocket anything. The consequences for theft were dire: instant dismissal at the least, and prosecution at worst. However, Mary is human and young. Maybe sometimes she can't help but notice a beautiful piece of jewelry or a fancy gown laid out for later, and feel a pang of awe or envy. She might think to herself how lovely it would be to wear such silk or to have a necklace of real pearls. But she shakes off the daydream and carries on. In a light moment, as she and Alice make the master's bed, Alice sticks out her tongue in distaste at the ugly hunting print wallpaper in the master's chamber. Once Mary's back is turned, causing Mary to stifle a little laugh. They must be careful. No giggling too loudly. But in private, the servants might share small jokes or comments like this about their employer's quirks or tastes, as a way to cope with the one-sided nature of their world. Gentle humor helps lighten the drudgery. At this point, around 9 a.m., the family is finishing breakfast. Mary hears the distant ring of a bell. Ah, the dining room bell. In the hall or kitchen, there is a bellboard on the wall. A row of little bells, each labeled with a room: front door, drawing room, master's bedroom, dining room, etc. These are connected by wires to bell pulls in the family's rooms. When a family member wants a servant, they pull a cord by the fireplace or door, and the corresponding bell rings and vibrates on the board downstairs. The bells are designed with a coiled spring, so that after ringing, they continue to jingle for a short while, making it obvious which one moved. Servants quickly learn to recognize which bell is which, even by sound. Some bells were tuned differently so you could tell, say the front door versus the upstairs parlor, just by the jingle. An unanswered bell was frowned upon, so when one rings, the nearest free servant should dash to see to it. Often a hallboy or footman monitors the bells. The dining room bell means the family is ready for the next course or finished their meal. The footman on duty goes in to clear plates or bring whatever is needed. Mary doesn't need to attend to that. Clearing the table is typically the footman's job while the butler supervises. Instead, Mary uses this time to slip into the now empty morning room or boudoir, perhaps to tidy up there. Or she might assist the housekeeper downstairs with something briefly while waiting for the family to leave the dining room so she can clean it. After breakfast, the family disperses. The master might retire to his study or go out to manage estate business. The mistress might go to the drawing room to write letters or instruct the housekeeper on menus or household matters for the day. The young ladies might practice piano or do embroidery. The son might go off to town. Regardless, the servants now move into the next phase of the day. Mary and Alice will now thoroughly clean the dining room after its use. The tablecloth will be shaken out, crumbs collected. Maybe Mary quickly feeds a crumb or two to the spaniel under the table, with a furtive grin. Dishes are already being taken to the kitchen by the footman. Mary polishes the dining table, folds the tablecloth, or replaces it if it's soiled, and sweeps up any crumbs on the floor. The footman likely already did a crumb sweep after clearing plates. They also check the sideboard and return any condiments or items to the pantry. If any breakfast food spilled on the floor, or if a guest dropped a napkin, Mary tidies it. With breakfast over, the servants' hall now comes alive with the servants finally having their breakfast. At roughly 9:30 a.m., the cook rings a small bell or sends word that the servants' meal is ready. Mary, if free, can now sit for a few minutes with a bowl of porridge or some bread and butter and a cup of tea. She and Alice gratefully rest their feet at the long wooden table in the servants' hall, joining the others. The butler might read out any announcements or the housekeeper might give out assignments for the day at this time. It's not exactly relaxed. Conversation among servants at table is sometimes limited and respectful, especially if the butler or housekeeper are present, as they sit at the head of the table in a position of authority. But there may be some low chatter among the younger staff about trivial things, the weather, an errand someone must run, etc. Mary quietly chats with Alice. Will you be going to the village on your afternoon out this week? Yes, if Mrs. Barrow permits on Thursday. I need to buy some new ribbon. Little normal girl talk, kept discreet. The footmen might joke amongst themselves about a sporting result, and the cook might grumble that the master's guest barely touched the kedgeree she made. How unappreciative. This moment of rest is brief. Within 15-20 minutes, everyone has to be back to work. There are still plenty of chores to do before the day is over. In fact, a servant's work is never truly done. The maid's daily chores. Now we transition into the late morning and afternoon, where the routine shifts to more thorough cleaning and maintenance tasks. Mary has a sort of rhythm for each day. Certain tasks are daily, while others are weekly or seasonal. Daily tasks for Mary include making beds done, dusting and sweeping main rooms, ongoing, keeping fires going all day, cleaning lamps or replacing candles, and answering any bells or specific instructions that come. Weekly tasks might include turning out a room, which means a deep clean, moving furniture, cleaning under carpets, polishing everything extensively, usually one room at a time on a rotating schedule. There might also be specific days for polishing brass like door handles, candlesticks, or cleaning windows, a big job involving ladders and newspaper wiping. And then there's laundry day, as mentioned, likely Monday, or perhaps Tuesday for ironing. If Mary doesn't do laundry, the laundry maid does, but Mary might still have to cart linens to the laundry, or help with folding and ironing if needed. Let's follow Mary through some of these typical chores. Mid-morning cleaning. Mary sets about turning out one of the main rooms, as per the housekeeper's rota. Today, for example, it might be the library's turn for a deep clean. This means that on top of the normal dusting, she will thoroughly clean this space. She and Alice plan to tackle it together. First, Mary carefully removes the knickknacks and books from surfaces. The library has tall bookshelves. She can't remove all books, that would be an all-week job, but she might take a dusting brush to the spines and edges. She might climb a small ladder to reach high shelves, using caution not to fall. An injury would be terrible, plus damaging a book or ornament would get her severely reprimanded, or even fired if it's valuable. Alice brings in a bucket of warm water and some rags. The two maids shut the doors, so that any stray noise of their work doesn't disturb the family elsewhere. They roll up the rug as much as possible, and drag it just outside the library door to beat later. Mary then takes a beater, a woven rattan paddle, and gives the rug a good thwack thwack whack out in the courtyard or on a line. Dust billows out, she ends up coughing a bit, and bits of dust pepper her face. It's grimy work, but the difference in the rug's color afterwards is satisfying. Meanwhile, Alice sweeps the now bare library floor, and then scrubs any spots. They wipe down the baseboards, and reach into the corners of the ceiling with a long-handled brush to snag cobwebs. Spiders, beware. Mary returns and helps wipe the furniture. There's a big wooden desk that gets polished with beeswax polish until it gleams. The leather armchairs are brushed. The window panes, oh those endless panes, they have to be cleaned of soot. Coal fires leave a fine film on windows over time. They use a bit of vinegar and newspaper to polish the glass until it's clear and bright. Old newspapers are great for polishing windows, a trick still used today. They also take down the heavy velvet curtains from the windows to shake them out. Usually, heavy drapes might only be fully cleaned or replaced seasonally, but a good shake weekly helps remove dust. These curtains are heavy and awkward. Mary's arms ache as she helps hold the fabric while Alice gives it a shake. Possibly, if it's a truly deep clean day, the curtains could be taken outside to air or be gently beaten too. Mary notices how the rich red color of the curtain has faded near the edges from sunlight over the years. Little details, a servant observes silently. After a thorough airing and dusting, the room smells fresher, perhaps a hint of the vinegar, which will dissipate, and the mustiness is gone. They rehang the curtains, roll the rug back out, aligning it just so, put everything back in its place. Each book in the right spot, each ornament exactly where it was. The mistress would notice if something was moved an inch. Finally, Mary uses a piece of cotton cloth to dust the delicate objects, like the marble bust on the shelf and the intricate clock on the mantel. For very fine items, like gilded frames or crystal vases, she uses a gentle touch, sometimes even just a soft feather or a bit of cotton wool to catch the dust. By the time they finish this intensive cleaning of the library, both maids are a bit sweaty and flushed. It might be midday or approaching it. Mary's stomach rumbles again. Thankfully, the main meal of the servants' day, called dinner, is coming at around noon or 1 p.m. Noon or 1 p.m. Noon or 1 p.m. But before that, Mary has another important chore: maintaining the fires. The fires lit in the morning need to be tended regularly. Coal doesn't last forever. Every couple of hours they must be refilled and the hearth tidied. Mary carries the coal scuttle heavy with coal lumps from room to room, adding a shovel or two of coal to each burning fireplace to keep the flame robust. She also checks that the fireguard's metal screens that prevent sparks from flying out are properly in place to avoid accidents, especially if no one is in the room. She uses tongs to adjust logs or coals as needed. The warmth is pleasant on her face as she kneels by each hearth. It would be nicer if she could just sit by the fire and relax, but not yet. Work awaits. She notices one fireplace is burning low. Perhaps she forgot to put enough coal earlier, so it's a bit ashy. She quickly sweeps out some ash and rekindles it. A cold fireplace might earn her a reproach from the family member using that room, so she's diligent to keep them all going strong. On a particularly cold day, this routine is life-saving for comfort. On a mild day, fewer fires might be lit, or they could be allowed to die down earlier. Next, Mary might be called upon by the housekeeper for some sewing or mending work. In a Victorian home, servants often had to repair linens or clothing as part of their duties. After the midday dinner, there may be an hour where housemaids sit down with needle and thread to darn socks, sew up small tears in sheets, or stitch new tablecloths. Mary is not a seamstress exactly, but she's competent with a needle. Most girls of her time learned some sewing young. She carries a basket of linens to the housekeeper's sitting room, and if time allows, joins Alice and maybe the cook, who might be trussing something in some quiet sewing. Mary might be hemming a new dishcloth, or patching one of her own aprons that got a hole. Sometimes she also uses this time to mend her own stockings or to work on a little personal project like making a new cap for herself from scrap fabric the mistress gave her. This sewing hour is somewhat restful. They sit down, maybe share a bit of gossip in low voices while their hands work. They must still jump up if a bell rings or if called though. Now let's discuss laundry. One of the biggest chores in any Victorian household. Even though Mary might not be primarily a laundry maid, the task is so labor-intensive that all hands often pitch in. Laundry day, as mentioned, usually took place once a week. For narrative's sake, let's imagine it's Monday, laundry day, and Mary has to help out for a couple of hours with the wash. Down in the wash house, which might be a separate outbuilding or a section of the basement, huge metal cauldrons called coppers are filled with water and heated over fires. Linens, sheets, tablecloths, towels and clothes are soaked, scrubbed on washboards with lye soap, boiled to sanitize, then wrung out and rinsed multiple times. It's hot, steamy, back-breaking work. The laundry maid leads the operation, with the scullery maid assisting and maybe one of the footmen to help wring large sheets. Some houses had a mechanical wringer, a big crank-turned roller, but still needed muscle to operate it. Mary's role might be to carry heavy baskets of wet laundry out to the yard for drying or to help hang them on lines. Picture Mary and Alice hauling a sodden bundle of bed sheets that weigh a ton with water content out into the yard and hoisting them onto a line. Their dresses get damp, their sleeves rolled up, sweat on their brows. They might joke, "We'll be as wrinkled as prunes after all this steam," or sigh that at least it's nice to be warm on a cold day from all the boiling water around. After washing, later comes ironing, often on Tuesday for the things that dried Monday. Ironing was also a big job, using heavy flat irons heated on the stove, pressing the wrinkles out of every shirt, every frill, every sheet. Mary may not do the fancy ironing. The lady's maid might iron the mistress's dresses or the valets do the master's shirts, but she likely has to iron simpler items, like napkins or pillowcases. Ironing required care. Those irons were hot, and if left too long they could scorch cloth or burn fingers. A maid might spit on it to test the heat. A quick sizzle means it's ready. We won't go too deep into laundry, it could be a whole episode of its own. But suffice to say, Mary's weekly routine definitely includes assisting with it. Many maids considered laundry the worst part of their week. The only silver lining is that sometimes laundry maids got to work out of sight in the wash house, so they could chat a bit more freely or even sing while scrubbing. The noise of laundry work gave some cover to break the usual silence. Let's return to Mary's daily flow. It's early afternoon now. The family likely had their own main meal, luncheon around 1 p.m. if they follow a later schedule, or sometimes they might not eat a big meal at midday, depending on how formal the household is. Victorian meal times could vary. But by late century the fashionable tended to a lighter lunch and a big dinner in the evening. The servants, however, definitely have their dinner at midday, which we noted. Mary enjoyed a plate of stew or boiled mutton with potatoes in the servants' hall. It was plain fare, maybe a bit greasy, but filling. They might have been allowed a small beer or ale to drink. Beer was common even for servants, since water could be unsafe and weak beer was considered nourishing. Often Victorian servants got a daily allowance or ration of beer, tea and sugar as part of their employment. Mary's house might give each servant a cup of ale with their dinner, which she drinks gratefully to wash down the hearty if unexciting food. The conversation at this midday meal is a bit more lively than at breakfast. One footman cracks a mild joke about the new kitchen maid who nearly burned the toast this morning. The cook Harrimson says, "Well, I can't get good help with the wages we pay." Mary just smiles quietly. She's not one to gossip much. After eating, Mary must get back to it. The afternoons for housemaids are often a continuation of cleaning tasks. Dusting again. Believe it or not, dust accumulates quickly, especially from all the fireplace soot, ventilating rooms. Maybe doing some flower arranging if the mistress likes fresh flowers in the house. The gardener might drop off cut flowers, and a maid arranges them in vases. Mary's fingers might be a bit rough, but she has an eye for making a pretty bouquet for the drawing room from roses and ferns. She also likely assists the housekeeper with inventory or fetching things. For example, the mistress might have requested some item, have cook prepare the guest room fireplace, or make sure the blue drapes are hung in the parlor for the summer. The housekeeper relays these to Mary and team. At around 4 p.m., many households gave servants a short break for tea. Yes, even the servants had a kind of tea time, though it was brief and the food minimal. Servants' tea might consist of a mug of tea, and maybe a small bit of bread or a simple treat if available. By this hour, Mary is indeed feeling the fatigue of having been up since 5. She eagerly anticipates a sip of hot tea. Often the cook would brew up a big pot of strong black tea for the servants. Mary sits for 10 minutes in the kitchen, cradling the warm cup between her reddened hands, savoring the taste. She chats quietly with the scullery maid, who finally has a small break after cleaning up the servants' dinner dishes. The scullery maid's name is Bessie. She's just 15 and looks perpetually damp from dishwater. Mary kindly asks, "How are you getting on, Bess?" Bessie shrugs, "Lots to wash, same as always. At least the laundry's done for the week." Mary offers a sympathetic smile. She knows Bessie's work is even harder than hers in many ways. The housekeeper steps into the kitchen, and the casual chatter halts. Mrs. Barrow reminds Mary and Alice that after tea they must prepare the lamps for the evening. In the era before full electric lighting, which only came in widespread use in the very late 19th and early 20th century, houses relied on oil lamps and candles for light after dark. As twilight would descend, someone had to go around and make sure lamps were filled, wicks trimmed, and candles placed where needed. Often the butler or footman took care of major lighting in reception rooms, especially if there were elaborate gasoliers or oil chandeliers. But maids might be tasked with cleaning lamp chimneys, the glass flues that cover oil lamp flames, and refilling smaller oil lamps used in bedrooms or corridors. So Mary spends some time in a small lamp room, or at the pantry, carefully pouring whale oil or kerosene into the lamps from a fueling can. It's a smelly job. Lamp oil has an odor, and you don't want to spill it on yourself or the floor. She wipes the glass chimneys to remove soot so they'll shine bright. She trims the blackened parts of the lamp wicks so that the flame will burn cleanly. If any candles were heavily used the night before, she replaces them with fresh ones, and collects the old stubs to be melted down or discarded. By the time she's done, the household's evening illumination is ready. As the afternoon progresses, Mary might also get a moment to attend to her personal living space, maybe quickly making her own bed in the attic, if she hadn't done it in the rush of morning. Servants had to keep their tiny quarters tidy too, though their focus was obviously on the family's areas. She may quickly shake out her blanket and fold it at her cot, and perhaps open her little window to air the stuffy attic for a few minutes. If it's a nice day and not too busy, sometimes in the afternoon a maid might be allowed a short outing to run an errand in the village, like buying more soap or thread, or to go accompany the children on a walk, if she's a nursery maid. But a housemaid like Mary, in a busy mansion, probably stays on site during the day, except if specifically sent out. She might longingly think of the outdoors on a sunny spring day, how nice it would be to stroll in the garden instead of dusting the grand staircase for the second time. Speaking of the grand staircase, Mary likely has cleaned that by now too. Those broad steps and banisters needed daily sweeping and polishing because people go up and down constantly. Mary might have in the late morning taken a bucket and brush to scrub the stairs, if wood, polishing them, if stone, scrubbing them. Often maids actually polished wooden stairs by sitting on a step and sliding down step by step on their bottom as they polished, which is a funny visual, but it worked to cover each tread evenly. Perhaps Mary finds a bit of levity doing that, joking to Alice, "Don't shove me, or I'll toboggan straight to the bottom." We should note the pay and living conditions as part of her daily context. Mary, as a housemaid, doesn't earn much by our standards. A typical housemaid, in mid-Victorian times, might earn anywhere from £10 to £20 per year, depending on her experience and the wealth of the employer. Mary, being junior, probably gets on the lower end, say around £12 a year. That's £1 per month. She doesn't see all of it at once. Usually, servants were paid quarterly or yearly, and some of it might be withheld as savings or in case of damages. Some employers deducted breakages from wages. But importantly, she doesn't have to pay for her housing or food. She earns her keep by living in. Her needs are provided, albeit in a basic way. She gets uniforms or a clothing allowance perhaps, meals, and a dormitory-style living space. Still, £12 a year is a paltry sum for so much labor. It's enough perhaps to send a few shillings home to her family and to save a bit for her own future hopes. Maybe Mary is saving to buy her trousseau for when she might marry, or simply to have a little nest egg. Some positions paid a little better. A lady's maid might get £20 or more a year, and the cook maybe £25. The lowest, like scullery maids, might get only £6, £8 a year. So Mary is somewhere in the middle among female staff. Money aside, one perk is that the family sometimes gives cast-off clothing to the maids. The mistress might pass down an old dress or two, which Mary can alter for herself or use the fabric to make aprons. This is welcome, since buying fabric is expensive and the maid's own dresses wear out quickly with all the hard use. Mary cherishes a wool shawl that her lady gave her last winter. It was out of fashion for the lady, but for Mary it's the nicest item she owns and keeps her warm in the drafty corridors. Now on to etiquette and interactions as evening approaches. The servant's etiquette and demeanor. Throughout her day, Mary's behavior is guided by a strict code of conduct toward her employers, and even toward the higher-ranked servants. It's worth delving into these expectations because they truly shaped what it was like to be a maid. Not just the tasks but the manner in which she lived every moment under someone else's roof and rules. Victorian servants were expected to be respectful, quiet, and deferential at all times in the presence of their masters and mistresses. What did this mean in practice? Speaking only when spoken to, or when necessary. Mary would never start a casual conversation with the master or mistress. If she needed to ask a question, say, "Shall I draw the bath, ma'am?" or "At what time would you like dinner served, sir?" she would do so succinctly and politely. She would never chatter about her own life or make a joke with them. As one 19th century guide put it, a servant should never begin to talk to the mistress unbidden. Mary follows this. When Mary brought the morning tea, she spoke only to convey necessary information, not to comment on the weather, unless maybe to politely say, "It looks like a fair day, ma'am," if making light conversation at the mistress's lead. Being as unobtrusive as possible, Mary keeps her voice down at all times upstairs. A saying was that a servant's voice should never be heard by the family, except when absolutely necessary. That means no laughing out loud, no yelling across rooms. Even if Mary needs to get Alice's help for something while in the hall, she will walk over to her and whisper, rather than calling out from a distance. Shouting or loud banter was considered very bad form. If Mary is working in a room and the mistress enters with a guest, Mary will immediately stop any conversation if she was speaking to another servant, and possibly step quietly to the side, or leave if not needed, with a curtsy, so as not to intrude on the lady's conversation. Acknowledging orders properly. When Mrs. Barrow or the mistress gives Mary an instruction, Mary must respond, "Yes, ma'am," or "Yes, sir," loud enough to be heard, to show she heard and will obey. Not responding could be taken as either not hearing, or worse, as passive disobedience. A brisk, "Yes, ma'am," is a hallmark of a well-trained maid. Mary always says it with a respectful tone, not too familiar, not too cold. Addressing the family correctly. Mary addresses her employers formally at all times. The master is Sir or Mr., last name if needed, the mistress ma'am, or my lady if she has a title. Their children would be master first name for young boys or miss first name for young girls, until the girls marry and become ma'am as well. If Mary refers to them when talking to another servant, she might still say the master or her ladyship, etc. One must never use just a first name or a casual nickname for the employers. That would be seen as very impertinent. Interestingly, servants often referred to themselves by just first name or by surname, depending on role. Maids often first name, butler usually surname. Among themselves, Mary and Alice use first names with each other since they are equals, but they call the butler Mr. Thompson and the housekeeper Mrs. Barrow, even behind their backs out of habit, or perhaps a slightly cheeky nickname in private, but never openly. Deference in presence. When Mary is in a room with the family, she might stand slightly aside, not making eye contact unless spoken to. Eye contact can be seen as challenging, so she usually keeps a modest, attentive expression. If she needs to pass by the mistress in a corridor, Mary will yield the way, perhaps flattening herself to the wall to let the lady pass, eyes down, or duck into a side door to avoid crossing paths. Some households even had rules that if you heard the master or mistress coming, you should make yourself scarce. No lingering or eavesdropping. If Mary is dusting in the drawing room and the mistress and her friends come in to converse, Mary would quietly finish and leave as soon as possible. It's considered very bad to appear to be listening to the gentry's conversations. Mary has perfected a bit of a self-effacing pose. She keeps her head slightly bowed and focuses on her work as if she's deaf to anything else. Nevertheless, servants inevitably overheard lots of private talk. Servants' ears are everywhere, as the phrase went. A wise servant acted as though she had heard nothing, and a wise employer pretended servants were invisible when speaking freely. There was an almost theatrical element to this. Everyone knew the servants likely heard and saw much, but it was an unwritten rule that it not be acknowledged. Privacy and discretion. If Mary does accidentally hear something scandalous or personal, she's expected not to repeat it. Servants' gossip in the servants' hall might cover some benign observations. The mistress seems worried lately, or the young master came back very late last night. Did you see? But overt sharing of family secrets was dangerous. There was always the fear a blabbermouth servant could be dismissed, or, if it was something really damaging about a high family, perhaps worse. Many a Victorian novel hinges on servants keeping or leaking secrets. But Mary is a good soul. She keeps any sensitive information to herself. Posture and movement. Mary tries to carry herself with modesty. When she's standing by, while the mistress writes a letter, in case she's needed to fetch something, Mary stands straight, but not stiff, hands clasped or at her sides, not fidgeting. She's had it drilled into her to not fidget, not scratch in public, not yawn, and certainly never to sit in the presence of a lady or gentleman, unless explicitly told to. If she got a sudden itch on her nose, she'd likely wait until she left the room to surreptitiously scratch it, rather than do something unseemly in front of the mistress. Cleanliness and attire. A maid had to keep a neat appearance. Even though Mary gets very dirty doing chores, she is expected to keep her uniform as clean as possible when around the family. That's why the apron change and occasional washing of hands throughout the day. She also keeps her hair covered, the cap so that hair doesn't shed or look disordered. In some houses, maids even had to wear different outfits for different times of day. A print dress in the morning, and a black dress with white apron in the afternoon, evening when they might serve callers, or the family in a more formal way. Mary's household might not be quite so strict to require multiple costume changes in a day, but she at least did the apron swap and possibly would change to a better dress after the morning heavy work, if expecting to answer the door. Yes, sometimes housemaids doubled as doorkeepers, if footmen were not available. They'd need to look presentable to greet a visitor with, "Good afternoon, how may I help you?" These rules could feel oppressive, but Mary has internalized them by now such that they are almost second nature. Still, it's a lot of emotional labor, always smiling politely, holding one's tongue, appearing cheerful, and eager to serve, even when tired or upset. A servant could not show personal sadness or anger. If Mary received a letter at lunch that her mother is ill, she might shed a few tears in the kitchen among sympathetic co-workers. But when she goes to serve tea to the mistress, an hour later, she must appear composed and calm, not burdening the family with her personal woes. Now and then, a new servant with less training might slip up. Maybe a young maid says, "Good morning," too casually to the master, or forgets to say "ma'am." She would be sharply corrected by the housekeeper or butler, perhaps even in front of others. Embarrassing. Mary, having been in service a couple of years now, seldom slips. She's proud that the mistress has never had cause to complain about her manners. Let's inject a little gentle humor regarding these rules. Mary sometimes finds it ironic that the family can be quite loud and emotional and messy, as all humans are, yet it is the servants who must always be the cool, calm, and collected ones, cleaning up after them silently. For instance, once Mary walked in on the master scolding his son vigorously, voices raised. She backed out swiftly, but she thought to herself wryly, "If we servants carried on like that, we'd be out on our ears." Or when a guest got tipsy and spilled wine on the carpet during a dinner, causing a mini uproar, Mary had to rush in to blot the stain quietly, while the guest loudly apologized and the host insisted it was fine. Later, below stairs, Mary imitated the guest's slurred apology in a comedic whisper, making Alice stifle laughter. "Pardon me, I've ruined the carpet," just out of earshot of the butler, of course. These small moments of humor amongst servants poke fun at their betters in a safe way. It's a subtle rebellion that harms no one, and keeps them sane, and keeps them sane, and keeps them sane.